Hello and welcome back to another video. My name is Brandon Watts. Today we'll be talking about how you can speed up your real estate photography workflow for free inside of Photoshop. Now in the last video I talked about how you can take the actions within Lumenzia to take multiple exposures from light to dark and effectively merge them into one high dynamic range image that blends the shadows, midtones, and highlights fast and efficiently. We'll be taking that same process and applying it here so that way you can follow along if you're just beginning, don't have the money, or just flat out don't want to buy any additional software. This video is not just for flash ambient real estate photographers, but also for HDR photographers, as we'll see in the second image. So why would we want an HDR image over a single exposure image to begin with? Well, we take a look at these two images close up, it becomes immediately apparent that there are major errors when it comes to the single frame image. We'll take the single exposure, we will set a mask, M for marquee, and we'll just go ahead and expose underneath that. So now that you can see by looking at these windows side by side, this left single exposed image inside of the sky is actually quite blown out, whereas on this right hand side you're able to see a little bit of detail in the clouds, not too much, only for the fact that I expose all of my interior HDR images one stop to the right of the middle of the histogram. So because of this, there's not much clarity outside that window, though if you exposed properly you would see more detail in the HDR ambient file compared to this single exposure. Whereas with this single exposure, if we would have stopped down to the middle of the histogram, you might have seen some detail in these clouds, but it probably would have been about the same as this HDR ambient. Now we zoom out, we'll go ahead and delete this mask, zoom into this single exposure. You can see how dark it is inside of these shadow parts of the image. Whereas with this HDR ambient, it starts to get a little bit brighter without adding more noise to the image. If we go ahead and turn this back on, set a mask, hit G for gradient, and we'll just go ahead and drag that right over. You can clearly see the difference between the single exposed shot here on the left, where those shadows will definitely get clipped as we add contrast and shadows to our image. Otherwise, with an HDR ambient base image, our shadows are going to be more intact with less of a probability of them getting clipped. So now that we zoom out, we can see that this image is nicely blended between the shadows and highlights for this HDR ambient compared to this single exposed image, where although this might look nice, we're not exactly trying to have blown out highlights or clipped shadows in our images. So I prefer to shoot an HDR ambient bracket at 2 stops apart, which is just as fast as shooting a single frame exposure and then having to correct for that in post. So how do we fix those issues that arise from using a single exposed image? By quickly and easily switching in the camera from single shot to exposure bracketing. For me, I like to shoot 2 stops apart with my interior middle exposure set at 1 stop over the middle of the histogram. For exteriors, I shoot with my middle exposure set at the middle of the histogram. Knowing this, how do we set up and create our own HDR image without the use of anything other than Photoshop? Well, allow me to show you, my friends. And now that we're back in Photoshop, the first thing we're going to want to do is go ahead and go into our window, down to Actions to show our Actions panel. Now, I already have a YouTube Actions folder set up, separate from my main actions that I use on a daily basis. And the purpose of what we're trying to do today is to create an HDR image. So let's go ahead and create a new action. We will label this action HDR merge. We will hit record. And the first thing we're going to want to do is rearrange our exposures so that our middle exposure is going to be at the bottom of the 3 image stack. But we can't necessarily just select these layers and then move them over, because as you see, inside of your action, it actually says I want to select layer DSC03003, which of course is going to be different for your own file names, but it's because of that difference in file names that this isn't always going to be the same every time we work on a new image. It's always going to be different file names. So what we'll do is hit stop. We will just delete these parts of the action. Go ahead and drag this back up to the top so we can start fresh. Make sure you're selected on your HDR merge, and we'll go ahead and hit record. Now, in order to move this layer down, we're going to go ahead and hit Alt or Option left bracket. Then we'll do a Control left bracket to select that middle exposure and move it down 1. We'll do Alt or Option right bracket to go back up. We'll do Alt right bracket one more time, And what we need to do with this top layer is disable the visibility. So we'll do Control, comma. To go back down one layer, we want to do Alt left bracket. Then we'll select our channels, Control, hold down Control or Command, select your RGB thumbnail, then do a Control or Command plus Shift plus I to invert your selection. We'll add a layer mask. Then from here, we'll do a Control or Command, Shift plus Alt or Option, click on the thumbnail, add layer mask. From here, you're going to want to go back to your Layers tab, add another layer mask, and then inside of our properties, we want to drop the feather, or we want to raise the feather up to about 300 pixels. Doesn't have to be exact. Let's just go with that. Then we'll do an Alt Control A to select all layers. We'll do Control, comma to add visibility back to all the layers. Alt period to select the top layer. Go back to your channels. Control or Command, click the RGB channel, add layer mask. Then we'll do a Control or Command plus Alt or Option plus Shift, click on that new thumbnail, and we will create another mask. Go back to your layers, create another mask. This is for your highlights. Go up to your properties, and we're going to feather this mask by about 8 pixels. That's close enough. We'll do an Alt or Option Shift left bracket. Do it one more time. Alt or Option Shift left bracket to select all 3 of those layers. We will do a Control or Command E to merge those layers. And instead of clicking on this layer again, we don't want to do that. We're going to go up to Layer, Rename Layer, HDR, Ambient. Then from here we can stop our action, and that is going to be our merged HDR image that blends in our shadows and our highlights all at the same time. So if I were to scroll up in the histories to delete layer, select this top image. Let's go ahead and close this HDR image. We'll hit play. And there you are, an HDR image, fully blended, super quick and easy. Now I can finish the rest of this image with all of my other actions. So this is going to be my ambient blend. This will be my darken repair right here. And then this will be my gradient blend to mask myself out. And there we are there. Looks pretty good as a base. We'll do a Control or Command plus Alt and Option plus Shift plus E to merge all visible. Control or Command plus Shift plus A to bring up our camera roll. Go ahead and hit it with a little bit of auto. I will bring back the vibrance and the saturation, as I no longer like adding that to my image. I will drop my shadows as usual. Let's see here, maybe a little bit of some contrast. Bring up the exposure a little bit. Highlights are decent. Okay, we'll hit OK, and that is a finished image ready for any standard real estate shoot. But what if I don't do flash ambient and instead all I do is HDR? How would I go about doing that? Okay, so now you can see that we are working on this exterior image. We have 3 exposures from light to dark, taken 2 stops apart. This middle exposure is taken right at the middle of the histogram. It's not exposed to the right like I do with my interiors. So we were going to go into our actions with our HDR merge action that we just created. Let's go ahead and run that. There we are there. It's already merged from light to dark. We can do our camera raw. Hit it with an auto, see what happens. It's not too bad. Let's bring down those highlights for those clouds. Those are looking nice. For these exteriors, I'll go ahead and pump up my vibrance and saturation, because I sure like that vibrance and saturation when it comes to the exteriors. And there we are there. That is a fairly easy edit when it comes to exterior HDR images. Now all we have to do is save, and let's go into Lightroom to bring in some more. When you're in Lightroom, here's a pro tip for opening up your 3 exposures quickly. If they are stacked, all you have to do is just hold down Shift and click on the little number icon at the top left of the image, and that will automatically select all 3 images inside your stack. So that way we can do a right click, edit, open as layers, let that open up super quick. Now that all 3 of those are open, we can just hit it with our action, HDR merge, open up camera raw, and let's just see what happens if we do apply previous. That's a good start. Let's bring back that vibrance and saturation. And now you can see how easy it becomes to start to edit these images back to back. And that is a perfectly merged image. So now you can see that these clouds are looking pretty great. Shadows aren't too bad inside of here. They're not too dark, not really too clipped. That's a good image. I mean, I'm sure you could take this a lot further, but I think for standard real estate, this will definitely do. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop a comment below. Thank you all to all my subscribers and to everyone that engages with the channel. It really helps out the algorithm. I certainly look forward to creating more videos for you all. You all take care and have a great day.